New York, JFK Airport, 5:58 p.m. Late autumn. The wind slices cold between the towering glass facades. At Gate 42B, Flight 409 is preparing to depart for Atlanta. First-class passengers board in order, hot coffees in hand, polite smiles on their lips. And then, a sharply dressed black man steps into the cabin. From that moment on, the air shifts. No one screams. No one steps in to stop him. But an invisible verdict has already been passed. Spoken entirely through stares. New York, Male 5:30. Gate 17, Carter Nova Flight 409, non-stop to Atlanta. The first-class cabin door opens, and a black man in a navy suit steps across the velvet carpet threshold. No music, no greeting. Just a silent wave of glances sweeping from head to toe. Jamal Carter, a composed face, a black leather bag over one shoulder, a tailored overcoat draped cleanly over his frame, and footsteps paced just slow enough to be courteous, just sure enough not to bow. But the moment he enters the cabin, the atmosphere changes. Seat 1A, a white woman with platinum blonde hair, freezes mid-motion as she adjusts her Hermes bag. Seat 3C, a middle-aged businessman glances over, then frowns as if someone had lost their way. The flight attendants say nothing. An Asian man in a grey suit turns away the moment Jamal's gaze nears. No insults, no overt actions, just a quiet consensus that he wasn't the kind of person they were expecting. In this space, Jamal doesn't react. He's used to it. He walks forward, eyes focused on the seat printed boldly on his boarding pass. 1C. The soft tap of his leather soles on the premium cabin floor echoes faintly, each step a subtle beat inside an orchestrated silence. No one stops him, but no one welcomes him either. First class. A place where people introduce themselves with titles and champagne replaces small talk. Falls suddenly, silent. As Jamal Carter placed his bag into the overhead compartment, a woman seated in front of him subtly extended her hand, holding a small silver packet of disinfectant wipes. She said nothing, just a swift, tidy, and deliberate motion. She wiped down the armrest, the one Jamal had brushed with his hand 5 seconds earlier, carefully, every inch, no spot missed, as if she were scrubbing something away. Jamal didn't react. He didn't need to. He was fluent in the language of silence. Across the cabin, a flight attendant floated by with a tray of champagne. The silver tray gleamed as it glided past the front rows, each offer sweetly delivered. "Would you prefer Moët or Dom Pérignon, sir?" When she reached Jamal, she paused, just slightly, and then moved on. No question, no eye contact, no acknowledgement. A minute later, the man across the aisle received a warm towel with a cheerful, "Have a relaxing flight, sir." Jamal's tray remained empty. No one said a word about him. Seat 1C, his seat, looked pristine. Not because it was well prepared, but because no one had touched it. No water, no menu, no eye contact. Just a subtle, invisible barrier, like a wall of glass, separating him from the hospitality everyone else was freely given. And as Jamal adjusted his seatbelt, another flight attendant passed by, briefly paused, then leaned toward her colleague and murmured almost under her breath, "Skip the towel for 1C. Just leave water. That'll be fine." Jamal heard it. He didn't lift his head. He simply pressed his lips together and looked out the window. The sky was beginning to dim. The flight hadn't taken off yet, but the air inside the cabin had already turned cold. Not from the AC, but from words meant only for certain ears. 2 rows behind Jamal, a deep male voice spoke. "Did first class go on sale or something? Feels crowded lately." Another voice replied, softer but pitched just loud enough for the right person to hear. "Probably reward points, or got lucky. Like a raffle or something." Chuckles followed, not loud, but sharp, like razors sliding across still water. Jamal didn't turn around. He just closed his eyes for a beat, then opened them. He was used to this. A minute later, the woman in the seat diagonally across. Perfect curls, wine-red nails. Leaned toward her companion and mock whispered, "Did you notice the nose? That kind of nose doesn't show up in boardrooms." The man beside her chuckled, trying to hide it. "Yeah. Textbook blue-collar bones." Another soft wave of laughter. No applause needed, because in first class they thought they were performing. For each other. A flight attendant passed by, smiling warmly at the man in 3A, then leaned in and murmured, "Have you tried the white wine from last time? This batch just came in." Jamal saw all of it, heard every fragment, but he didn't hold it in anger. He recorded it in silence. A habit formed long ago, a kind of memory. That didn't require a device. Jamal had just stood up to straighten his coat when a tall, broad-shouldered man in a beige trench coat abruptly stepped into the aisle, blocking it completely. He said nothing, didn't look, didn't move. He just stood there, like a door that didn't want to open. Jamal paused, his expression calm, composed, offering a slight nod, a silent request for passage. The man remained still, hand resting on the back of a seat, as if lost in deep thought. But there was nothing accidental about it. Only when a flight attendant behind them spoke, gentle yet firm, "Sir, would you mind letting him through?" Did he step back, 2 slow, deliberate paces? No apology, no urgency. He moved like someone, forced to retreat from a standoff. Just before turning away, he met Jamal's gaze for exactly 1 second. There was no rage in that look, just a quiet disdain. The kind reserved for someone they believe has wandered too far upstairs. Jamal didn't respond. He returned to his seat. The flight attendant passed by, setting a tray down on the seat beside him. A glass of wine, a warm towel, a leather-bound menu. Then she moved past Jamal, empty-handed, without a word. He stared straight ahead. In first class, guests are served like royalty in a castle. But for him, he was treated like the help, who'd accidentally sat down at the banquet table. Moments later, another flight attendant came down the aisle, with silver tongs and hot towels. Each towel was handed gently to its recipient, each with a courteous nod. Jamal extended his hand, not asking, not demanding, just waiting. The silver tongs reached his row, paused, then moved on. He was skipped, even with his hand outstretched. No eye contact, no explanation. It was as if he wasn't there at all. The sharp ding of a call button pierced the silence of the first-class cabin. It came from seat 1A. The platinum-haired woman with a silk scarf around her neck had pressed it, half turning in her seat. Casting a glance at Jamal, as if he were some design flaw in this carefully curated space. A flight attendant appeared instantly, bending forward politely. "How may I assist you, ma'am?" The woman's voice was soft enough to be called a whisper, yet just loud enough for those nearby to hear clearly. "I'm just not feeling comfortable with the man next to me. He's been staring at me this whole time." The flight attendant hesitated. She glanced toward Jamal. who was seated still, hands resting on his lap, eyes facing straight ahead. No words, no evidence, no gaze. Jamal slowly turned his head, just enough to meet the attendant's eyes. He didn't speak, didn't smile, just looked, as if asking, "Really?" After a beat of awkward silence, the attendant replied to the woman, "I understand, ma'am. Allow me to verify the seating assignment and ensure everything is in order." She leaned toward Jamal. "I'm sorry, sir. May I see your boarding pass for confirmation?" No argument. Jamal opened his leather wallet, pulled out the boarding pass, and handed it over. 2 fingers, calm and steady. The attendant looked down. Seat 1C. Name, Jamal Carter. Ticket class, Executive Elite, Platinum Business. She nodded, smiled. Not out of joy, but because there was nothing left she could do. "Thank you, sir. Everything is confirmed." She turned back to 1A, voice lowered with forced gentleness. "All information is valid. If you're still feeling uncomfortable, I can look into alternative arrangements." The woman said nothing. Her lips tightened. She didn't object. She didn't retract. Because she had already gotten what she wanted, the cloud of suspicion placed on an innocent man. Jamal remained seated, still and silent. But in his eyes, something shifted. Not rage, but a quiet alarm deep within. An understanding that this was no longer just personal. First class had returned to its routine rhythm, the gentle clink of silverware against crystal, the soft murmur of high-end headphones humming luxury soundscapes. It was as if nothing had happened. Jamal sat quietly in seat 1C, hands resting gently on his lap, eyes fixed forward. But the stillness didn't last. A woman from the second row, a heavy camel-colored leather bag slung unevenly over her shoulder, stood up to reach the overhead bin. As she passed Jamal, she halted. In a motion that was either careless or deliberate, her bag slipped from her shoulder and slammed directly into his knee. Thud, a sharp, heavy, real impact. Jamal flinched slightly, bit his lower lip. The woman turned to look at him, but showed no sign of panic, no remorse. Instead, she furrowed her brow and spoke, as if he were the one at fault. "Sorry, but you're kind of sticking out into the aisle. It's hard to get by." No concern, no glance at the swelling on his knee. A nearby flight attendant, who had seen the entire thing, said nothing. She merely glanced over and turned away. Amid the soft lighting and hushed extravagance of the first-class cabin, Jamal tightened his grip on the armrest. He took a deep breath. No words, no reaction, but for the first time, the calm in his eyes began to fracture. He looked down at his knee. The spot where her bag had struck was already turning red beneath the dark fabric of his slacks. It wasn't the pain that made him ache. What hurt was the unmistakable realization everyone here had chosen to treat his pain as insignificant. The pain in Jamal's knee still throbbed, but what stirred within him now was no longer physical. It was something else, deeper, older, a memory he had buried for nearly half his life. Outside the airplane window, night had fallen. The last band of light had slipped out of view like a door quietly closing, and in that dim reflection his father's face returned. Raymond Carter Sr., the man who once wore a pilot's uniform but was never allowed to fly because of the color of his skin. The man who was once dragged out of the cockpit in handcuffs for protesting discriminatory hiring practices at the airline. Jamal remembered the days his father came home, shoulders slumped, collar wrinkled, but eyes still shining. "One day, we won't have to bow our heads in our own sky." And then one day he stopped coming home. After the funeral, the newspapers called him a pioneer, a symbol of courage. But as Jamal stood before the cold marble of his father's grave, he made a vow. I won't live in my father's shadow. I will write my name with my own hands. Not through legacy, not through sympathy, not through old medals. He chose silence, declined interviews, never appeared on Forbes, avoided speaking at major conferences. He even let people believe Carter Nova Airlines had been founded by an anonymous group of investors. All of it for one reason: to prove that Jamal Carter existed without any legacy holding him up. But now, seated in first class, surrounded by silence, publicly belittled, treated as a system error within the very system he helped build. Because Carter Nova, the airline allowing him to be treated like luxury waste, was the brainchild of Raymond Carter Sr. He wasn't just a pioneering pilot. He was the co-founder of Carter Nova in 1983, a time when most major carriers still refused to put black pilots in the main cabin. And when he passed, Jamal quietly bought back the majority stake through an anonymous fund. And let no one know. The second ding echoed, not from a passenger this time. It came from the flight crew's internal control panel. A faint alert appeared on the lead flight attendant Chloe Barnes's tablet screen, along with a cold, clinical note. Passenger 1C flagged. Unsettling behavior reported. Source anonymous. She frowned, not surprised. Just another reason to validate the assumptions she'd already made from the start. Chloe stepped out of the galley, her pace brisk and rigid. She leaned toward the flight supervisor and whispered something. Something Jamal, though not trying to listen, still caught through the tension-charged air. We need to keep an eye on 1C. Could be a potential threat. A threat? He wasn't yelling. He wasn't disruptive. He hadn't touched anyone. The only thing he'd brought on board was his presence. A black man, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, carrying himself with quiet confidence. And somehow that alone had been enough to trigger an anonymous report. Jamal closed his eyes for a brief second. He understood what was happening, and it was time to stop it. He opened his bag, pulled out a sleek black phone, unbranded. No apps, no social media, just one section, emergency contacts. He dialed a single number, just one. His voice was low but firm, like cold steel. Carter here. Initiate Theta-level security review. I need the full flight log for 409. All internal complaints, cabin video feeds, crew audio, passenger list. Mark it as urgent. Send it straight to the executive inbox. Pause. A single second of silence. Use my personal authentication code. Yes, level 7. I'll sign the confirmation post-landing. No one in the cabin knew what was happening, but one thing was undeniable. The air had just changed. After the short call, Jamal slid the phone back into his leather bag, as carefully as if sheathing a blade. He didn't look around, didn't say another word, just sat upright, eyes locked on the space ahead. But the atmosphere around him was no longer the same. Behind him, a few passengers had looked up. One frowned. Another tilted their head, curious and cautious. A single question flickered through their minds. Who is he? No one knew, but everyone began to sense. He wasn't just another passenger. Jamal didn't need to introduce himself. He simply let power find its way to him, without ever naming it. The aircraft drifted quietly above the cloud line, but in first class, the atmosphere had started to shift. A young man in seat 3B, casually dressed, flipping through Aero Business Quarterly, had just overheard the phone call. He looked up, startled. His eyes darted back to the still-open magazine in his hands. A rare profile, the headline printed in bold, "Jamal Carter, the silent successor, the reclusive CEO behind the Carter Nova empire." No portrait, just a distant shot, the silhouette of a man walking into corporate headquarters. But next to it was a quote, "I don't need to be in the spotlight to lead this industry." The young man whispered to the passenger beside him, "Oh my God, I thought he never appeared in the media." This article came out just last week, exclusive print, investor circulation only. That's him, Carter. That whisper, like a spark dropped into a fuming gas leak. A woman reached for her phone, quickly typing, "Jamal Carter, Carter Nova." Her eyes widened at the results. The youngest man to ever own 51% of the airline founded by his father. Refuses all interviews, once silenced an entire investment board with a single spreadsheet. Built an empire by staying invisible. The man they had once scoffed at. Because he didn't look like he belonged in first class, was the very one holding ultimate power over the airline itself. No one dared laugh anymore, and that invisible wall of quiet contempt. Gone. The whispers had stopped, but the air had never been heavier. Shock no longer spoke aloud, it settled deep, cold and sharp. Now they were staring at something far more dangerous than rumor. The truth. Then the soft curtain between the cockpit and the VIP cabin stirred. Not a flight attendant, not security, the captain, Captain Gerald Hunt, silver-streaked hair, tall posture, carrying the calm of a man who had flown through decades, and yet had never faced something quite like this. He stopped directly in front of seat 1C. No staff introduced him, no need to ask for a name. He simply bowed his head, just slightly but with unmistakable respect. "Mr. Carter," he said, voice deep, clear, every word deliberate. "On behalf of the entire flight crew and this airline, I offer our sincerest apologies. A private suite has been prepared for you in the executive cabin. I cannot undo what has already happened, but I can ensure the remainder of this flight is handled according to your true worth." No one told Jamal to stand. No one dared. But he rose anyway, calmly adjusting his jacket button. No sarcasm, no glare, just silence. And that silence fell like a sentence passed. The entire cabin watched him walk. One by one, those who had once turned their backs now avoided their own reflections in the cabin windows. Lead attendant Chloe Barnes stood stiff beside the service cart, pale as chalk. She didn't greet him, because she knew. A greeting now would only expose how wrong she had been. Just as Jamal passed through the curtain, Captain Hunt turned to her. "Ms. Chloe Barnes, you are hereby relieved of duty. Report directly to ground operations upon landing. First class has no room for bottom class behavior." A single nod, a clear command, and the unraveling began. Starting with the one who thought she had the power to stand above, Jamal Carter stepped through the curtain, separating first class from the executive suite. But the sound of his footsteps behind him rang louder than any on-board announcement. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. Because every gaze that had once glanced at him with silent contempt was now lowered, not out of respect, but out of shame. Seat 1C sat empty. No one dared look at it. No one seated nearby said a word, because now they all understood. That seat was never just a seat. It had become a living symbol of exclusion, of judgment, and the moment everything changed. The man once denied a hot towel, a drink, even eye contact. was the very man with the power to dissolve the airline's executive board with a single call. No one was laughing anymore, and no one dared defend what had happened. Silence spread, like a shared, unspoken confession. In seat 1A, Lindsay Ashford, the woman who filed a false report claiming Jamal made her feel unsafe, clutched her silk scarf tightly, face drained of color, eyes fixed on nowhere. She had won, in a script written by prejudice. But now she had become the villain in a story no one wanted to be part of. In seat 3B, the young passenger still held the magazine, pages frozen mid-profile. He looked at the empty seat, then turned to his travel companion and shook his head. It's not the fact that he's the CEO that shocks me. It's that this entire cabin thought he didn't even deserve to be treated like a regular person. There was no applause, no dramatic reckoning, just a quiet shift. Irreversible, undeniable, happening in real time. Meanwhile, behind the curtain, Jamal settled into the wide leather chair in the executive suite. No more smirks, no more cold stares, only space that finally aligned with the dignity he had carried all along. Seat 1C remains empty, and maybe it always should. As a reminder to the entire airline, some lessons must never be learned twice. The flight touched down at 10:07 p.m. in Atlanta, Georgia. From the terminal window, streetlights shimmered against the plane's fuselage, casting a reflection over the words Carter Nova Airlines, no longer a distant name to first class. There were no boos, no waiting cameras, no speeches, only a tall black man stepping off from the executive cabin, greeted at the aircraft stairway by a personal representative from Carter Nova headquarters. Jamal Carter said nothing, but each footstep he took sounded like a warning bell, echoing through the entire industry. Some passengers exited the plane more slowly than usual, not because of luggage, but because they didn't know how to face themselves. After witnessing and silently complying with a moral crash at 30,000 feet. The next morning, the aviation industry shook. Carter Nova Airlines stock dropped 14% within 6 hours. Media outlets erupted, despite no video footage, no lawsuits. The costly silence when a CEO faces discrimination on his own airline. No cameras, but real consequences. The man in seat 1C, a slap delivered without a hand. A board of directors emergency meeting was called. 4 senior executives suspended. Lead flight attendant Chloe Barnes was terminated the same day for violation of service standards, discriminatory behavior, and damage to corporate integrity. On social media, someone quietly posted a photo from the in-flight magazine. The image of Jamal Carter standing in front of Carter Nova headquarters, with a simple caption, "This is the man they overlooked." Jamal gave no interviews, posted nothing, held no press conference. He let the system respond to itself through the weight of its own reaction. After the incident on Flight 409, Jamal Carter did not appear in public. No blame, no speech, no emergency press conference. Instead, a short statement was quietly posted on Carter Nova Airlines' official website on Tuesday morning. "We're sorry, and we begin again." Jamal Carter, chairman of the board. Just one line, no embellishment, no bold font. But the entire industry understood one thing: real weight doesn't come from volume. A few weeks later, an internal announcement was sent to all employees of the airline. The Raymond Carter Senior Scholarship Fund was officially established. Its mission, to train the next generation of Black and minority youth in aviation, aerospace, and corporate leadership. The fund wasn't headquartered in New York or Atlanta. It was founded in Baton Rouge, the very place where Jamal's late father, Raymond Carter Sr., had once been denied the chance to become a pilot because his ethnicity didn't match the airline's image. Jamal didn't stand on a stage for the launch. Instead, a recorded message played on a small screen over a black and white photo of his father framed against the open sky. I once thought I could escape my father's shadow by staying silent, but I was wrong. It wasn't his shadow pressing down on me. I've been walking the path he carved, with blood, with unshakable will, and with a faith that never broke. I didn't create this legacy. I'm only doing the right thing with it, inheriting it, and continuing it. Within 48 hours, over 6,000 scholarship applications poured in. Many came from rural towns where the word pilot only existed inside textbooks. One little girl wrote in her application, "I don't want to sit behind the airplane window anymore. I want to fly in front of it," and help people who were never allowed to see the sky see themselves up there. Jamal read that application in his office, and for the first time in years he cried, not out of anger, but because finally he knew he belonged to this legacy. An early morning at JFK Airport, Gate 42B. This was where Flight 409 once departed, where Jamal Carter, chairman of Carter Nova, was dismissed, doubted, treated like a stranger among privilege. This past week, the terminal moved as always. Passengers rushed. Coffee cooled quickly. Flights were called over the intercom in routine succession. No one spoke anymore of the man in seat 1C. No one, except for a small crew of technicians in grey uniforms, quietly installing something unusual. When the flow of passengers momentarily thinned, a security officer removed the final cloth covering. Behind the clear glass pane, there was no bust, no logo, no famous face, only a single first-class leather seat placed alone on a deep blue carpet. And above it, etched into a muted steel plaque, "Let no passenger be unseen." No mention of Jamal Carter, no inscription of honor, no QR code explaining the incident. But anyone who knew would understand, and those who didn't would stop, wonder, search. And then they would understand too. That same morning at Carter Nova headquarters in Atlanta, an internal memo was distributed. From this day forward, all flight attendant training programs will begin with 5 minutes standing before seat 1C, as a reminder that no seat is ordinary, when the person in it is treated as unworthy. In his private office, Jamal sat by the window. The sky was still vast, still blue, but inside him something had finally closed. The silence. Not the silence of avoidance, but the kind that comes after the world has been made to stop and listen. A reporter once asked him after the incident, if you could go back to that moment, would you react differently? Jamal smiled gently, "Number, because if I'd reacted the way they expected, that empty seat wouldn't exist. And no one would have learned a thing. Not everyone sitting in first class is important, and not everyone in a tailored suit is treated with respect. But some people, even when rendered invisible, choose not to break the silence with outrage, but with a quiet presence so unshakable that the entire system collapses under the weight of their gaze." Jamal Carter didn't reclaim his dignity. He made the world confront the ways it had stolen it. And in a cabin sealed tight with privilege, he didn't need to shout to be heard. He simply stood dash, and the truth spoke for him. That empty seat now is a symbol, not a tribute to him, but for everyone who's ever been seen as sitting in the wrong seat. in someone else's eyes. Because in the end, this is not just a story about a black CEO, not just about a flight or prejudice or quiet retaliation. It's a reminder that in every first-class cabin, every office, every life, there are seats that deserve respect, simply because the person sitting in them is human. If this story made you stop and think, share it. Because somewhere out there, someone is still sitting alone, just because the world hasn't yet learned how to see them.